Today we're going to go through a little bit about what CCL does, how we do it, what our plan is, and we're going to have fun, okay? We're going to keep you busy. There's going to be some interactive exercises, and at the end we are going to, all of you, plan, prepare for, and participate in a lobbying session with a member of Congress. And we'll have an experienced CCLer come in, one for each table, and you'll actually get to have that experience. My name is Carl Yaeckel, and I'm here with my friend and wife, Kate Keith. We are from the San Diego branch of CCL. And you know, when I joined CCL in 2014, or just before I joined, I was a grumpy old man.
From what you learned last year?
Thank you. I was yelling at the TV. I was yelling at the newspaper. I couldn't believe what was going on about climate change. And I was depressed. I was angry. And at one point I threw up my hands. I told my youngest son, the engineer.
Is it working?
That.
Can you hear me?
Who's that?
I just wanted you to know that I've been trying to do this
different
for
room.
effective communication.
I'll be loud.
And I just find
I told my youngest son, the engineer, that he'd have, you know, his ilk would have to save us with some sort of technological marvel. But I couldn't quit yelling at the TV and the news. And my wife finally told me that I should either shut up or do something. That may be why they can't hear over there. That'll do it. So in a few short years, I've gone from being that grumpy old man to feeling good. I'm doing this stuff. I love it. I'm doing what I love, and I'm doing it with people that I love. And I think that you were about to have the same experience if you stick with CCL. So we're going to have our very first exercise of the day. And in this one, I'd like to have each of you pick a partner at your table, and if possible, someone you don't know. And you're going to talk to them and tell them what it is you hope to learn here today, or what you what you are looking for today. So take a minute to do that, and then we'll switch. And your partner will have a minute to tell you the same thing.
No.
And I will announce when to switch. And of course, you will instantly stop speaking at the moment I say 1 minute. Yeah. Anyway, so pick your partner, and let's get started. The person with the shortest hair can go first. Is there one or two brave folks who would like to come up and share with all of us what that thing is that they've just talked about? Or if your partner said something particularly wonderful, you can come up and tell us about that. Any volunteers? Yeah, come on up here. There's someone. Thank you.
Was talking to Sarah, and she brought up something that I think a lot of people might be able to relate to. She's hoping to find in this session a way to talk to some of the people in her life who are climate deniers, and basically just assert the truth in a way that is non-confrontational but persuasive. And yeah, I think that's a great thing to learn.
Thank you. One other? We had some mics we were going to, have throughout that would work, but apparently they only work in the other room or something. They took the mics to fix our problem, and they haven't brought us back.
I'm Annie from Victorville, and I met Dennis, and I was really inspired by his story because he's from Santa Barbara, and he's an architect, and he does green building, and he's always tried to incorporate that into his plans, but he wanted to do something more. And he attended a presentation with Al Gore and asked someone, what is one of the most important things I can do, and was told join CCL. So like me, this is his third conference, and so I'm very inspired by him.
All right, thank you. Some of you may know, but Citizens Climate Lobby was started about 10 years ago by a real estate broker down in San Diego named Marshall Saunders. And, you know, when I joined CCL in 2014, everybody was talking about, oh, wait till you meet Marshall. You know, everybody's talking about this guy. I was on the introductory phone call, which Ellie Sparks was doing at that time. And she spent the first half of it talking about Marshall. And, you know, so I went to my first meeting, and what's unique about our chapter in San Diego is that Marshall is a member. And he's not the leader, he just comes as a regular old member. So I'm going to go to this meeting, and the leader then is telling you, oh, you're going to get to meet Marshall. And I'm thinking, who is this guy, Tony Robbins or something? You know, am I joining some kind of cult of personality? So I went to the meeting, and I didn't even know he was there for the first half. A quiet man, a humble man, certainly no ego involved. And just to give you an example of that, when Kate and I went to our first lobbying meeting in D.C. with our Congressman Scott Peters, who was also Marshall's, Marshall went, but not as leader of the meeting. So we ended up speaking to Congressman Peters in the hallway on our feet, and that happens sometimes for various reasons. And Kate was sort of toward the back of this clump of people talking to Scott Peters, and she felt a hand in her back, the small of her back, and it just pushed her forward toward the congressman. And that hand was Marshall's, and that's what Marshall does. He moves us all forward. Now, he started this group using a model that he had experienced with a place called Results, Inc. And it's based on two things. One, bipartisanship, and two, establishing a relationship with every single member of Congress, all 535 plus, which necessarily entails bipartisanship. Now, the New York Times called this model deep advocacy. I love that name. I could never quite figure out why they chose it or what it meant, but I finally figured out what it meant. It means that the volunteers, like us, we do all the work. There's no staff here, so I can get away with that. The volunteers lead the chapters. The volunteers lead the meetings. They build the relationships with their representative. They lead the climate advocacy training sometimes. The members, the volunteers, decide what and when and how to do what they are going to do. And that is pretty neat. And this is Marshall, and this is something I heard him say at my first regional conference. He used to think the important people were taking care of the important problems. No, they aren't. We all know that now. There's no bigger problem than climate change, and nobody's been taking care of it. So we get to do it, and we're going to do it. Now, I talked about, we're going to talk about what and how and all this other good journalism school stuff. But before we start that, the most important thing is why. Why do we do this? E.B. White, what's his most famous book? No. Incorrect. What's his most famous book? Thank you. The elements of style.
More people know Charlotte's Web.
I had the elements of style for many years before I ever heard of Charlotte's Web, but a stunted education. He said, every morning I awake torn between a desire to save the world and an inclination to savor it. This makes it hard to plan the day. But if we forget to savor the world, what possible reason do we have for saving it? In a way, savoring must come first. So this leads us to our next exercise. With your partner, and you can switch around at the table, get a different partner if you didn't like that person the first time around. I mean, if you want to meet somebody new. And tell them about some place, something that you love, that you want to still be there for your kids and your grandkids, and some place that's almost certainly vulnerable to what's going on with climate change. And we're going to give you an example.
Okay, this is the place that's nearest and dearest to my heart. This is Big Lake in northern Wisconsin, and I have gone up there every year since I was a kid to an island called Keith Island. It's a little island that my grandfather bought and left to his 9 children in 1908, and now 250 of my nearest and dearest cousins timeshare it with me. But the savoring is because it's my favorite place in the world. The air is soft. It's not like Southern California. There's a softness to it. The water is soft. There's woods outside the door. There's all kinds of wildlife. We see every year you have to figure out where the eagle's nest is this year. There's beavers on the lake. There's herons. They say there are fish in the lake, but I've never thought that was a good pastime. I hope they're still safely in the lake. There's ducks on the lake, and if I have to have a special thought or if I need to relax, all I have to do is think of Big Lake.
All right, so it's the same drill. Tell your partner, take a minute and tell them about this place, and then we'll switch around. And this time the person with the longest hair should go first. All righty. Hopefully both people got a turn, otherwise your partner's a time hog. Let's close her up. And we have a couple people who want to share their spot. Fine, got to have some participation here, or makes me look bad. I'll get a bad report card. Come on up. Yeah, you too.
Hello, my spot is everywhere. After the last election, I was hiking and crying and hiking and crying. And because I had thought, I like your E.B. White quote, because I had thought the good guys are going to fix this. The good guys are going to take care of this. And I realized, no, they're not. So it kind of really got me moving, and also I wanted to stop walking around and crying, so I just decided I got to do something, whatever it is. And one thing I really love about CCL, there's a lot of things to love, but I love how every time I talk to someone from CCL, they're so encouraging, and whatever I'm doing, they're like, thank you, and it's enough, it's enough. So it's been really helpful for me.
My partner Renee shared this inspiring metaphor where she compared backpacking through Pacific Coast Highway and Ridge to saying travels of life, where when you're backpacking, every single ounce counts because it's on your back. And that's how we need to travel through life, have a simple life, and just carry what you need and not all the riches around you that you can't afford to carry.
Thank you. See, those stories, those places that you've shared with each other, they're the beginning of your story as a climate advocate. Because it's really stories that human beings love and that help us connect with other human beings. Now here's a story from a sermon that Marshall was at years ago. During the Apollo mission in 1969, astronaut Rusty Schweickart was going on a spacewalk. Now, normally, NASA keeps the astronauts compulsively busy during spacewalks, before, after, the whole time they're in orbit. But a peculiar thing happened to Schweickart. Just after he emerged from the capsule, there were some problems that meant that mission control and his fellow astronaut in the capsule were completely busy, and Schweickart had nothing to do. Quite unusual. So there he was, all alone, floating around in space above Earth. During this time, Schweickart said that he had two profound conversion experiences. He looked back on Earth, a shining gem against a totally black backdrop, and he realized everything that he cherished was on that gem: his family, land, music, human history. He was so overcome that he wanted to hug and kiss that gem like a mother does her firstborn child. Compassion flowed through him, despite the fact he'd been trained as a jet fighter, a typical macho man, but he had a breakthrough to something bigger. Schweikart's second awakening was a political one. He was a red, white, and blue guy. This was 1968, the height of the Cold War. And he believed what he'd always been taught. The world was divided between communism and freedom. But floating around up there, he saw that you could see no borders on Earth. The rivers flowed indiscriminately between Russia and Europe. The ocean currents went everywhere, regardless of the political ideology of the nations. Clouds did not stop at borders. There were no nations. They only existed in the mind of man. On returning to NASA, Schweickart confesses that he wandered around in a bit of a stupor for about 6 months, literally bumping into walls and asking himself repeatedly, why did God do this to me? Finally, he concluded that God did this through him so that others might hear the message of compassion, interdependence, shared beauty on this shining planet. The holy earth, we must take care of it. It must take care of us. This side of heaven, where each of us so nearly all the other has. There's darkness all around us. Yet between us, there's just enough light to get by. All right, let's talk a little bit about the mission of CCL. You may have seen this mantra before. We'll break it down a little bit. The first mission of CCL is political will for a livable world. And we don't think that politicians create political will. We do think they respond to it. Politicians have big ears and sensitive, almost antenna. They sense when things are changing and when things are moving. So what is political will? Political will is people just like you telling the legislatures, the politicians, what you want them to do, explaining to them politely why and how it will work, and showing them a plan. We think political will is also political cover. For a congressman who's a Catholic, it may mean talking about Pope Francis's encyclical from 2015, Laudato Si. For a conservative congressman with a military basis in his district, may mean talking about how the Defense Department views climate change as a threat multiplier. For a congressman who cares about agriculture, it may mean telling him about the endorsement we have from the Farm Bureau. It'll be different for every member of Congress. Each one has his current position, public position on climate change, and a whole litany of interests and things that are important to him, unique to his district. Thank you. Thank you. As my wife often says, I'm Carl Yaeckel, she's Kate Keith, and because I was so stubborn, I wouldn't change my name when we got married. What's the second part of the mission? It's enabling individual breakthroughs in personal and political power. It's that hand in the small of the back moving you forward. We like to say that the magic happens when you get outside your comfort zone. And we'll try and do a little bit of that today when you meet with a member of Congress. You know, Marshall has a very good story told at the second conference I ever went to. Even though he is the founder of this huge organization and speaks to groups everywhere, and everywhere I go in San Diego, people already know who he is. He had his first lobbying experience when he was volunteering with Results, Inc. And I can't tell the story as well as he did. Hopefully you'll get to hear it someday. But the short of it was, he went into the meeting. He's in a team of 5 or 6 people, the way we do it. Everybody's got an assignment, something they're going to do during the meeting. So he went in and he sat down and he started thinking about his hands. Where should he put his hands? Should he clasp them? Should he put them at his side? Should he put them on the arms of his chair? And what about his legs? Should they be straight? Should they be crossed? Should he lean forward? Should he lean backward? What expression should he have on his face? And while he was busy doing this, the leader said, and now Marshall has something to say. And he realized he had no idea what it was he was supposed to say. He blanked out completely. So there was an awkward pause, but he got picked up. His leader kind of got an idea of what was going on there. Marshall's not saying anything. So he said, Marshall's going to talk about whatever the topic was. And that was enough. It all came back to Marshall, and he went on. So Marshall had gotten outside his comfort zone. But that is where the magic happened. From that, he went on to start an organization now with over 100,000 volunteers, over 500 chapters all over the world. All right, the next thing we want to talk about is what we call force versus power. So, lawyer and sociologist Charles Reich said this: anything that comes out of you and goes out into the world is power. In addition to that, the ability to be open, to appreciate, to receive love, to respond to others, to listen to music, to understand literature, all that is power. By power, I mean human faculties exercised to the largest possible degree. Now, when you reach out to another person through the energy or creativity that is in you, and that other person responds, you are exercising power. When you make somebody else do something against their will, that's not power at all, that's force. And force is the negation of power. Force is compulsory, it's coercion, it makes people smaller. Power is persuasion, it's relationship building, it's empathy. It makes people bigger. So we're going to do another exercise, and Kate's going to take us through this one.
Okay. In my storied career as a mother and a grandmother, I've got an example of what happens with kids. One time I was visiting my sister and brother-in-law. It was the end of a long day. We'd been at the park, we'd been at the zoo, there were young children, and it was what I call the bewitching hour for toddlers around 5 to 7. Usually they freak out. It's the melting time of the day. They have the least energy. There's the least amount of attention that adults have to give to them. At least in my house, it was always meltdown time. So it's happened the same thing. In my sister's house, we came back. My nephew started out playing by himself. He got a little tired of that. His fingers were covered in some kind of an orangey paste that comes from, is it Cheetos? Is it hot Cheetos? It's something really bad. Something really bad that we were poisoning with that day. And he started playing on the walls with his hands, cream-colored walls in my sister's house, a nice color of cream. And then he realized he had a pile of blocks, and he could, punt right into the middle of the target that he had just made with his hands. Well, his father saw that, and his father's tone got loud. He said some very angry things, along with the idea of, stop now, go to your room. He didn't say it quite that nicely. My mother was there. She gives me this under her breath. We women know everything. That's what you want to do to a kid, huh? Wait till they're tired and crabby and yell at them. Let's see how that works. So what my mother did, well, my nephew was having this meltdown. He went into a complete temper tantrum after that, was, let's go splash in the bathroom. And they made bubbles together in the bathroom sink. The orange came off his fingers. They came out of the bathroom smiling and singing songs. So that's an example of, one was, what are the two things we're talking about, power and force? Okay, one was power, one was force. So now we're going to move forward and see if you guys can think of some examples. It could be other situations, usually authoritarian situations. I can think of some. I was an elementary school teacher with principals where they told the teacher exactly what you have to do, as opposed to saying, what do you think is the best way for you to motivate your kids, versus you must do A, B, C, and D. So that's another example. But I'm going to have you talk about how you used force to get somebody to do something. That's one choice. Or you may talk about how someone used force to get you to do something, how you felt. How you used power to enable someone to do something. Or how someone used power with you to enable you to do something. So again, you're going to have to pick another partner, or you can repeat if you're ready. Pick one of these four and describe to your partner how power and force played out in your lives. Talk, talk, talk. Find a person.
Hello, my name's Jeff Reese, and I just met Eleanor, and she told me a story about how when she was a little girl, she was with her mother, and a friend said, "Oh, are you teaching young Eleanor to cook?" And her mother looked at her and said, "No, I'm teaching Eleanor how to read so that she can do anything."
I like that. Somebody else. Yes. Come on up. I noticed that so far you guys are better at talking about what your other people said. Yeah. You know, you can share your own thing.
Hello.
No pressure.
This is mine. So I had a gardener who would come to my house and use a leaf blower, and he had a mask on and headphones, and he seemed kind of grim about his work. And I was like, we've got these roses here and these beautiful this orange tree that's kind of ailing. What can we do to kind of make these plants happier? And then he really started thinking, oh, well, you know, I've heard about this fertilizer that works really well on oranges, and this is really good for roses. And now he's actually taking pride in the garden, and he doesn't, you know, put the headphones on. He looks happier, he looks more relaxed, and he's just kind of claimed the garden as his own project. That's it.
That's fabulous. And it's a good example about how exercising power can make someone else, you get them to do what you want, but they're also happier. They're a better person. And it's about establishing a relationship. Now, our executive director, Mark Reynolds, who is not either one of these pictures, often says that CCL bets the ranch on relationships, because ultimately that's what we work to do. You know, you're not going to go see that member of Congress in one session, get them to do everything that you would love them to do. And even if you did, there'll be more stuff to do soon after that. So you're going to see these folks time after time after time. So it's about relationship building. So I want to tell you a little bit about the relation between these two guys. Match made in heaven, right? They've got a lot in common, I can tell. The guy on the right, much less famous than Mahatma Gandhi, is General Smuts, Governor General of South Africa around 1910. And if you know something about the life of Gandhi, you know that as an adult, he went to work as a lawyer in South Africa, and he began his first campaign, his first political campaign in South Africa. So, and at the time he did that, General Smuts was the big cheese in South Africa on behalf of the British government, still a British colony at that time. So Gandhi, like a good CCL member, set up an appointment with General Smuts and went to see him. And this is a pretty famous encounter. Gandhi informed Smuts, "I've come to tell you that I'm going to fight against your government." Smuts, who was about 6'6" and a proportionate weight, and you can tell Gandhi's not fighting heavyweight at this point, Smuts must have thought he was hearing things. He said, "You mean you've come here to tell me that?" He laughed and said, "Is there anything more you want to tell me?" "Yes," said Gandhi. "I'm going to win." Well, Smuts was astonished. He says, "Well, how on earth are you going to do that?" And Gandhi smiled. "With your help, General Smuts." Many years later, Smuts admitted that that is exactly what Gandhi did. By his courage, his determination, his refusal to take advantage, but especially by his endless capacity to stick it out without yielding, but without retaliation or hate or even anger. These two actually established a long relationship. When Gandhi left South Africa to go to India, where he achieved such great fame, he sent General Smuts a gift, a pair of sandals. Gandhi had made them in prison in South Africa. And General Smuts is the one who would put him in that prison. Smuts said that he wore them every summer at his farm near Pretoria. And at the time of Gandhi's 70th birthday in 1939, Smuts sent them back to him as a birthday present. Smuts said, "I wore those sandals for many a summer, even though I may feel I'm not worthy to stand in the shoes of so great a man. It was my fate to be the antagonist of a man for whom even then I had the highest respect. He never forgot the human background of the situation, never lost his temper or succumbed to hate, and preserved his gentle humor even in the most trying situations. His manner and his spirit even then, as well as later, contrasted markedly with the ruthless and brutal forcefulness which is the vogue of our day. Okay, we have one rule for our meetings with members of Congress. They mentioned it earlier, stole my thunder. It's always stated as the rule for meeting with members of Congress, but I find that it's a rule that works very well for all of your relationships, that you approach that person with respect and appreciation and gratitude. We don't say negative things like Madeline talked about earlier today. CCL is for things. We're not against things. And this played out, there's one famous meeting with a member of Congress that I heard about in my first or second conference, and I want to tell you about. There'd been a meeting set up. It was supposed to be what we call face-to-face. You're meeting with the congressperson themselves as opposed to a staffer. But at the last minute, in this conservative office, the meeting was changed to a staff meeting. So they went in, and as we do in every meeting, the meeting starts with a specific thank you to that lawmaker for something they have done that we thank them for, respect them for, have gratitude for. Now, in the case of this very conservative lawmaker, not known as an environmentalist, a climate change skeptic, he had put a bill through Congress that helped preserve a wetlands area in his particular district. So they researched it, they found out about this, the CCL team did, and they thanked the staffer, asked them to thank the congressperson for doing this. And right at that moment, they heard a voice from over the partition. And you may not have been to a congressional office yet, but they're dumps. They're tiny little dumps, at least over in the 2 of the 3 buildings. And the voice said, you know, I worked long and hard to get that bill passed. It was the congressperson. And he actually came out, and they then had a pretty good meeting. He'd been ducking the meeting. He didn't want to meet with another environmental group who would tell him he was wrong, tell him he was an idiot, and would yell at him. And that's our way. And the result of that is that there are plenty of people, plenty of members in Congress who've never met with any environmental group except for CCL. And I got told that conservative officers sometimes said this to our teams, and I didn't believe it, but I went to a meeting, and they said, gosh, we're sure glad to meet with you guys, because you don't yell at us. It's a simple little thing, but it has an enormous power. And going back to Gandhi, you know, his movement of, to do this quote, I have to pronounce this word, it's his word for his nonviolence movement. So bear with me, it's satyagraha. Satyagraha. Thank you. You know, I played the little thing on Google over and over. And this is what Gandhi said, that experience has taught me that civility is the hardest part of satyagraha. Civility does not mean the mere outward gentleness of speech cultivated for the occasion, but an inborn gentleness and desire to do the opponent good. These must show themselves in every act of satyagraha. Don't have to pronounce that for another year. All right. So, this is our methodology. This is how CCL does what we do. We work what we call the 5 levers of political will. And they didn't put these in the right order on my slide, but they're all there. You'll figure it out. The first one, of course, is lobbying, meeting directly with the congressperson or their staff. It also means writing or emailing or tweeting or phone calling that congressional office. We try and meet with the congressional offices 3 or 4 times a year. We have 2 big conferences in D.C. Where we get a bunch of people back there and all go up on the same day. And then we have 1 or 2 meetings in the district at their district offices. The next lever that we work is the media. We write letters to the editor. We meet with the newspaper editorial boards seeking endorsements. And we write and get published op-ed pieces for the opinion section of the paper. And that's a particularly important activity. Writing letters to the editor is something everyone can do, and it's something that's very much worth doing. We hear a lot about newspapers are dying, nobody reads them anymore, but I can give you the example in San Diego County. We basically have one paper, the San Diego Union Tribune. Its circulation, even in these bad times, is still 250,000 papers a day, and most of those are read by more than one person. So there's no other platform where you can reach as many people at one time as that, particularly for free. So when we see an editorial or an article or an opinion piece or even another letter to the editor on climate, we have a team that alerts all our chapter members, and they get their little figurative pencils out and send in letters to the editor. It's a lot of fun, and it's cool seeing your name get published in the paper. I'd never written one or had one published until I joined CCL. We go to the editorial boards, and that can be a long process. Last November, the San Diego Union finally endorsed the Energy Innovation Act, which is our bill that was first introduced in December. In fact, when we last met with them, we were just asking them to endorse the old version, carbon fee and dividend, but they actually decided to endorse it, and then the bill was released a couple days before their editorial, and they changed it to an actual endorsement of the bill. And that was nothing magic that we did in November. It was the 4th or 5th time that we'd met with the editorial board over the years. It was the 3rd set of owners for the paper. So it's that polite persistence that is our hallmark. The next lever we work on is grassroots outreach. We have volunteers at tables, at big public events. San Diego, we're getting ready for a couple of different Earth Day events, and we'll have teams there that will table, we'll talk to people, try and get them to sign letters to Congress, give them materials about the organization and about climate change. It can be presentations. I do a lot of presentations, usually to liberal and progressive groups around San Diego. We chose that audience initially because our particular chapter in San Diego had 3 Democratic congresspersons. So we thought if there was going to be heat on these people about our policy, it might well come from the left. So I've been going out and doing presentations to lots of different groups, talking about CCL, the work, and the policy. And the other part of grassroots outreach that we'll want all of you to do every day is talk to people about climate change. Catherine Hayhoe, who is a well-known climate scientist, climate communicator, and evangelical Christian from Texas Tech University, is quite famous, is on our board. And She has a wonderful program, by the way, if you haven't seen it. It's called Global Weirding. It's a podcast, and I recommend it to you. It's on YouTube. She said the most important thing you can do to solve the climate crisis is to talk about it. People still don't talk about it enough. So I talk to groups, I talk to friends. Back when I worked, still worked, I talked to coworkers, family members, people who pause too long on the street. Let them know. And the interesting thing about that is the polling and the sociological data show that most of the people you'll approach are already worried about climate change, but they aren't talking about it. So it's not that stereotype that you're going to say something to someone and it's going to turn into that, like drunk uncle on Saturday Night Live, and someone's going to start ranting at you. Most people are worried about it, but most people aren't talking about it, and we've got to change that. The next lever we work is what we call grass tops outreach, and that's really approaching other groups, businesses, institutions, and seeking endorsements and coalitions. And that's very important, and that's what Madeline was talking about a little bit, and what about Senator Levy was talking about in her talk. And finally, the fifth lever is the chapter and personal development. Trainings. This is a training. Our online website is full of trainings, resources, advice, support, you name it. Whatever helps our members do the work that we are doing. So let's talk about the plan. And up until a couple months ago, this part of the talk was always about what we called carbon fee and dividend. And that's the basic heart of the legislation that was first introduced in December and reintroduced last month in the new Congress. Now, I'm going to keep it simple today as we move toward our meeting with a congressperson in a few minutes, and keep talking to you about carbon fee and dividend, because that's the muscle, that's the engine of the Energy Innovation Act. And also, the next general speaker will be our legislative director, Danny Richter, also from San Diego, who is going to talk about the Energy Innovation Act in more detail. And in fact, a lot of the stuff you'll find on the website about it has been worked up so far as sort of how it's the same as carbon dividend and what's different. But the beating heart of the legislation is still carbon fee and dividend. So, what is carbon fee and dividend? The first part is to put a fee on the carbon dioxide content of fossil fuels. And then you raise that fee from an initially low level, you gradually raise it until fossil fuels are not being used anymore. You price them out of existence, something that will take a number of decades. A number of advantages to doing it that way. And it's the same under the bill. You start at $15 per ton of carbon content, and it goes up $10 per year. In the new bill, that's slightly different. It goes up $10 plus the last year's inflation rate. So it's inflation indexed, as they say. And that steadily puts pressure on fossil fuels competitiveness with clean energy. And the fact that the increases are built in has a number of big effects. People tend to think about it just in terms of what they would do. Well, let me step back. The fee is paid by about 2,000 entities. The refiners, the miners, and in some cases, the importers of fossil fuels. And that's in the wonky parlance of carbon tax world, that's called upstream. And that means the effect of the fee is felt throughout the entire economy. You don't get exceptions. You don't get areas of the economy that aren't impacted. Now, even though it's paid by just a couple thousand entities, we would all feel an increased cost of living because the fee will be mostly, if not completely, passed along to consumers. Now that means, of course, that consumers will start looking for alternatives. Things that are less carbon intensive will be less expensive. So the move toward solar, toward wind that's already very strong will be accelerated. But it's not just consumers that will feel this, of course. Businesses will be in the same boat, and they will be looking for alternative energy. Similarly, investors, nobody's going to invest in a new coal plant once this law gets passed. The way the fee works on a per ton basis, the highest impact, the greatest impact is on coal because it has the highest carbon content. Oil is next, and then natural gas. And if you think about it, someone building a plant or someone investing, they look into the future. Sometimes you and I look into the future a bit. If you're sort of a tightwad, like I am, I buy cars and then I keep them until they don't work anymore. So that's 8 or 10 years. So with a plan like this in effect, I'm going to look a lot harder at mileage and maybe even at an electric car. So that's the first part of the plan. The second part, and probably the more controversial part, or at least the part that people have lots of ideas about, is what do we do with the money? Because it's a lot of money. After 10 years, it's something like $300 billion a year. It's a lot of money. And, you know, politicians, money. They like to have money to spend. So I like to say when this bill is now in Congress, it will soon generate 535 great ideas about what to do with the money. And most of you here probably have great ideas about what to do with the money. But you know, it won't be your idea that gets picked. Or if it is picked, it'll just be a little piece. Because everybody will want a piece, right? It's like the old movie, everybody will want to wet their beak. So for everyone who want to use that money to invest in clean energy research, there'll be someone who wants to invest it in cutting corporate taxes or cutting the deficit. And well, what about the coal miners? And you know, everybody will have their worthy cause. So what this plan calls for is the dividend. We're going to take the money every month and send it back to every American household as a dividend check. And that is in fact what they do with the state severance tax on oil production in the state of Alaska. And some overseas countries do that as well, Norway, for example. Now, the dividend, sending it back to everybody, has two wonderful effects. The old rap on a carbon tax was, well, it's going to make everything in the economy more expensive. It'll hurt the economy. Growth will slow. Well, turns out if you get the money back into the economy right away, it doesn't hurt the economy. And studies show that as long as you move the money back into the economy quickly, and the dividend is one of the quickest ways to do it, that the economy will actually grow slightly more than if you didn't have any policy at all. The other nice thing about the dividend, of course, is it will make the policy somewhat bulletproof in the future. If you think of taking the money and bitsing it up into different pieces for many different special interests, remember, you'll get to do that every year. That's a lot of political energy. Whereas if it's going in checks to people, nobody's going to mess with it. But perhaps the most important reason for having a dividend is that most of the people in our economy, they're barely making it. They're barely making it. And you're going to suddenly raise their cost of living. And you're going to tell them that, well, the world is in a lot of trouble. And you need to make some sacrifices so that we can fix it. And that's how you get the Yellow Vest movement in France. What happens with the dividend is that working class families and poor families will get a check every month that will, in most of their cases, more than make up for the increased cost of living. We actually had a study done, and about 65% of households, generally at the lower end of the income scale, will get as much money back in the dividend or even a little bit more than their cost of living goes up. Because it turns out that carbon dioxide emissions are kind of like money. There's just a few people have most of them. The great bulk of emissions come from wealthy folks. So the way I've heard this said is, the fee is a market-based way of getting rid of fossil fuels. That makes it a win for conservatives. No more bureaucrats, nobody telling you what to do. And the dividend is very progressive in the sense the income tax is progressive. It makes sure that we aren't fixing this problem on the back of the people who can least afford it. And these are also the people that we know from the environmental justice movement are the people who felt the worst impacts from climate change. Yes, and that's generally the 30% of the households with the most money.
Oh, okay, it's not the people on the lowest.
No, it's the rich people, jets, big houses, lots of plane trips, many cars. Oh, she was asking, she thought I'd said that the 30% or so who wouldn't break even were at the low end of the income scale. I looked that up the other day, and in the United States, that's a household income of around $90,000. It varies from year to year, but give or take, that's the ballpark. All right. Yes? Oh, that's a very advanced question. I didn't mention the way the dividend is calculated. It's by household, so there'd be one check per household, and that's an IRS definition, so I'm not sure if you're living with a roommate how that works out. But basically, each adult would get one share, and each child would get 1/2 of a share, each one under 18. So that gets you a total number. How it breaks down, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. We did do a study on, we did a study on delivery, and it's actually fairly straightforward. Both Bush presidents did tax rebates where checks were mailed back. It'll be done basically the same way that was done, which I don't remember how it was done. It wasn't very much money. Yeah. That's a good question. Basically, she's saying, as demand for fossil fuels decreases, the dividend decreases, and people wouldn't like that. And at least we had a study done that went dynamically modeled this out 20 years. And at least during that time, the dividend continued to increase. It increased more and more slowly because the drop in demand is not as big as the increase in the dividend. If you start at $15 and you increase it $10 a month that first year, that's a 70% increase. So the fee keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it takes a long time before you start to see a decrease in the actual dividend amount being paid out. And that's not addressed in the original plan or in the legislation, because you're looking 30 or 40 years out, and who knows what folks will want to do then. I want to talk real quickly about the third part, which we call border adjustments. That's pretty simple stuff in concept. You're buying your oil from a producer in West Texas, and he's paying a fee that gets bigger and bigger, and the oil's getting more and more expensive. So why don't you just buy it from Saudi Arabia, where they don't have it, and the oil will be cheaper. And the reason you won't do that is because when that Saudi Arabian oil comes to the port of entry, it'll pay a tariff equal to the fee. So it makes for a level playing field, and it gives countries around the world that aren't doing something to price carbon an incentive to do so. In other words, why should they pay the money to U.S. Customs when they could basically keep it or pay it to their own government? Okay, you caught me. I was going a little fast. I was trying to get to the, there would be tariffs or rebates to American manufacturers, or tariffs on foreign manufacturers on what's called carbon-intensive goods. And all of that is kind of complicated to implement, but not real complicated to understand in theory. So that's the basic way it works. The bill has some other things in it, but it has these three things, which are the central mechanisms that make this thing work. And Danny will be spending some time with us this afternoon going into more detail on that. So we're going to move on. We're moving on toward our meeting with members of Congress. And there's a guy named Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called Outliers. And he discusses research done at the Berlin Academy of Music. They divided violin students into three categories: the stars, the good performers, and this was the third most proficient, and this is what they say, the ones who would become teachers. And I'm married to a former teacher, so, but, I don't write them, I just do them. And it turned out the best predictor of what group the violinists fell into is how many hours of practice they'd done. The future teachers had about 4,000 hours in their lifetime. The good performers about 8,000, and the stars, every single one of them had practiced at least 10,000 hours on their instrument. And even more interesting, there wasn't anyone who'd practiced that much, that 10,000 hours, who wasn't in the star category. And a similar story is told about the Beatles. It's not well known, but they were a bar band in Germany for many, many years before they became famous. And they played every night. And it seems quite certain they put in their 10,000 hours. So when their chance at fame came, they were ready. So this is just working up to the fact that you don't get to meet with that member of Congress until you've done some work. I work for a guy, he was the first member of the JAGs, the military lawyers, Judge Advocate General. He's the first one that ever qualified as a paratrooper. He went to airborne school. No one had ever done that. He was crazy, but he believed in hard work. And he would always tell me, Carl, prior preparation prevents poor performance. So we're going to prepare. And what one of CCL's basic training tools is called a laser talk. And you can find them on the public website. They are basically, what's called now an elevator pitch on every subject you could think of that relates to climate, climate science, climate impacts, and our policy. So we're going to do a laser talk, and this is used to be the first laser talk that people would look at. It too has been replaced in light of the new Energy Innovation Act. But the laser talk is still the heart of the act, and it's what you want to internalize. So the laser talk, a fee, is placed on fossil fuels at the source. It starts at $15 a ton of CO2 emitted and increases by $10 a ton per year. The net revenues are returned to households. 2/3 break even or receive more in their dividend checks than they pay in higher prices. See, that was already pithier than I was. All right, now I want you guys to recite along with me. A fee is placed on, and the fee starts at, and increases by, and the net revenues are? That's us, yes. How many break even? Or receive more than they pay in higher prices. All right, time for our next exercise. You're going to grab your trusty partner, figuratively speaking, and give them the laser talk, and then you'll switch and get the laser talk back. Let's rejoin me. Now you know what comes next. So who's going to come on up here and give the laser talk? The bravest person in the room. Where are you? Come on, there has to be one. Someone has to be bravest. All right, come on up. And we had a good question during the break. Somebody asked, what exactly does that mean, $15 per ton? That's how much carbon dioxide gets emitted when a certain quantity of fossil fuels are burned. And it's calculated by the ton of carbon dioxide released. It's not a controversial calculation. It is a little complicated. If all the fee was passed through to consumers, your gasoline would go up by about 15 cents a gallon the first year. So that gives you a sense of the magnitude. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys about the carbon fee and dividend, which is something none of you have ever heard of before. It's brand new. Okay, so we're going to place a fee on fossil fuels at the source. So right where these fossil fuels are emitted and extracted, so not, based on purchases. It's going to start at $15 per ton of CO2 emitted, and that will increase by $10 per ton a year. These revenues will be returned to households. That's why it's a fee, not a tax. It will come as in the form of a check mailed to each person, head of household, or adult in the household, and 2/3 of people will receive the same amount or more in their dividend checks than they will pay in higher prices. So it's good news for most of us.
All right, give her a hand. All right, it's time to do a little bit more to get ready for our lobbying meeting. Now, when we're having an actual meeting with a member of Congress or their staff, what happens is the liaison for that office, we designate one CCL person to be the liaison, the point of contact between the office and the organization. That's so we don't get many people telling them or asking them many different things. Doesn't mean everybody isn't writing in letters or calling or emailing to voice their support or their position. But when we're talking about things like scheduling a meeting or making a request, we have one person that does that. So the liaison would get the meeting scheduled. Then the chapter or chapters involved would call for volunteers, and they'd get together a team of usually 5 or 6 people. Before the meeting, you'd get the CCL biography of that particular congressperson that's researched and will tell you all about them, significant things they've done, where they stand on climate, that sort of thing. You'll also get a copy of the notes from all the previous meetings we've had with that member of Congress. So that's super important because it's an ongoing relationship and we don't want to be repeating what has been covered already or missing what hasn't been covered. Now, we won't get any of that today for your meeting. But for this, we will do the remainder of the preparation, which is the team gets together before the meeting and they plan out an agenda and they assign the roles that people will have in the meeting. Now the roles are these. First you'll have a meeting leader, and that's not someone who talks too much like me, that takes up all the air in the room. It's more like a master of ceremonies, except absent the bad jokes and monologue at the beginning. Just someone to keep things organized. There will also be assigned someone to do the thank you right at the top of the meeting. Now, again, we don't have specifics about our members of Congress who have just wandered in. So just thank them for their work on environmental issues. Next role is the person who makes the ask. And the ask is what we are requesting in that particular meeting. And when we go to Washington, D.C., up until now, and have our big series of meetings, the ask is always the same. We want you to sponsor or support the Energy Innovation Act. Now, in the real world, many times we may be meeting with someone who has already sponsored it or who has already supported it. So we may have secondary asks, more specific things that we're asking them to do. But today it's just asking them to sponsor or support the Energy Innovation Act. Next role we have is someone who will keep the time. You don't get to just rely on me. And this is a very important thing. You know, you'll remember when I said when we started that we always finish on time. And that is the ultimate expression of our respect for the people we are meeting with. That we begin a meeting, the timer will ask, how much time do we have today? Again, today you don't have to worry about that. You'll have 8 minutes. But we do in real meetings, and then the timer will let everyone know when that time has passed. And sometimes who we're meeting with will say, thank you, but we can keep talking. And that's the best feeling in the world. It's a lot better than when you just keep talking and they look at their watch suddenly and go, oh my gosh, I've missed my important meeting. That leaves them with a lot different flavor about CCL than the first scenario. The next role is someone who takes notes. And in the real world, again, that's the most important person in the meeting. Because the notes get read by our legislative director, they get read by the chapter leader, they'll get read by the people who are meeting the next time. And so it's important that we get a thorough set of notes. Oops, where am I? Oh, and then the remaining roles vary from meeting to meeting, but they're people who will talk on particular topics. And today, your topic is carbon fee and dividend, the basic laser talk. And it's not just a matter of talking. We don't want to just go in there and give a big information dump. Your goal, and it is definitely one for today, is to engage in a conversation with these folks. Get them talking. You learn when they talk. They much more than they learn when you talk. And it's to get them asking questions. That's what really tells us what's going on and what helps us move along. Quick example, there was a congressman in San Diego County. He'd been in the military. His dad was congressman before him. He was in the military. For years, we assumed that the most important thing on earth to him as a congressman was the military. We went to many, many meetings and talked about the military, until finally we learned that the most important thing to him was agriculture. Made a difference in all the meetings after that. So, your agenda for today, you'll want to start very quickly with introductions and always include the congressperson in the introductions. Sometimes you learn something right there. Make those just quick, your name, where you're from. You'll want your thanker to do the thank you right at the top. You'll want your timer to ask how much time there is today right at the top, and the answer is 8 minutes. You guys got that? You know, sometimes these congresspersons, not the sharpest. Okay, 8 minutes. And then you'll have someone do the ask. And from there, try and make it a conversation. Look for common ground. Look for stuff you didn't know. And what we're asking the congresspersons to do today when we start is they're going to tell you if they're a Republican or Democrat. You'll have to figure out the rest for yourself. So right now, take 5 minutes. Your teams are already assembled, and figure out who's going to take what role, and then we will get started after 5 minutes. So get prepping. Congressional delegates for their assistance here today. Yeah. Okay. Is there? I wonder if one or two people would like to come up and share what they think of the meeting with their congressperson or with what we did here today in general. Who wants to come up and take a shot? A brave volunteer there. Very good. All right, all the Yardbirds in the back.
Hello.
Rejoin us.
Cool. So let's see. As the note taker for my group, we had the pleasure of speaking for about 8 minutes with Congressman Lowenthal, who I, in real life, did actually call recently. First time I called a congressman. But so we talked about. We introduced our thanks with thanking him for his recycling initiatives in our district. And that was our main hook. The congressman mentioned that recycling and environmentalism were important in the district. With that as our in, we launched into the ask and laser talk. And the discussion was very fruitful. Although the congressman was supportive, there were a few curveball questions that, fortunately, our group speakers were prepared for. For example, the first follow-up question was, will this affect low-income households? And we clarified that the 2/3 who will break even or more are the lower income bracket. He also asked about the sponsorship process. So at this point, we realized, we had a very, an interested member of Congress and who was asking about the process of getting involved, of sponsoring. So we followed up and encouraged on that. There was one. What was it? There was a question about will businesses pass the cost along to customers, and we clarified that point as well. Slightly more clear than I am clarifying at the moment. So I believe it was a well-rounded group. I felt the discussion went very well, and special thanks to our imitation congressman. So thank you. Yes.
Thanks to you. Sure.
Let's give a special round of thanks to all our members of Congress who have been with CCL for a long time.
You are excused.
That means you're excused, but let's have a round of applause for all our brand new lobbying teams. Thank you so much.
All right, some closing thoughts. We're almost done. Andres Rondon was a Venezuelan economist, and he said that what can really win them over is not to prove that you are right. It's to show that you care. Only then will they believe what you say. And climate change is such an enormous challenge, but I was struck by this quote I saw from the Talmud. I'm not a religious scholar, but I do follow Facebook, and it was showing up a couple months ago. It says, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." So we're all working on this together. And as a group, we will get there. We will walk this path. So one last exercise before we go. Grab that partner, figuratively speaking, and tell them what you learned or what you liked and what you'll take home from the conference so far today. And let's have the oldest person go first this time. Take a minute, and then we'll turn it around. Hopefully you both gotten a chance to say something. And let's have a couple of people come up here one more time to share what they had to say or what their partner had to say. Sure, come on up. All right, hang in there. We're almost out of here.
All right. Yeah, hey, my name is Ross, and I just thought that one of the things that we liked really, and we all agreed liked a lot in our group session, was the fact that we rotated from person to person. We were there to back each other up, and that was really important and felt good to us. And I was the one that sort of asked, was second in asking, why do we believe in this? And I just kind of spoke from my heart. And it's remarkable how easily I slipped into that and how profoundly that felt to me in talking to a fake congressman. I mean, but it was a real thing. A fake thing turned into a real thing. And I think it's really critical that when we talk from our hearts. If we talk from our hearts, people hear us instinctively. And if we don't, we all have a BS indicator that goes, duh, 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 and you won't hear what other people say if it's BS. And they won't hear what you say if it's BS. If it doesn't come from your heart. No matter whether you're right or wrong, facts don't matter. It's whether you establish that relationship. And the emphasis on relationship, interpersonal relationship, and compassion that we've heard here is crucial, I think, to having this be a success and crucial for the future of our world.
Thank you. All right, one last thing before we wrap up, and you are officially climate advocates. This is from Pope Francis's encyclical, Laudato Si. "No system can completely suppress our openness to what is good, true, and beautiful, or our God-given ability to respond to grace at work deep in our hearts. I appeal to everyone throughout the world not to forget this dignity which is ours. No one has the right to take it away from us." And I think, for me, CCL is about political dignity, our dignity as citizen lobbyists, and the dignity of our lawmakers who we talk to. We're enabling ourselves to do great things, and even more important, we're going to enable our legislators to do great things about climate change. So thank you very much for being here today, and go forth and lobby.